Welcome, everyone, to Hot Science at Home. It's brought to you by the Environmental Science Institute at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm Dr. Jay Banner, but just for tonight, please call me Bruce. We're really glad you could join us tonight to hear about science and the Avengers. And I want to offer special thanks to our newest sponsor, HEB. We'd like to give a shout out to groups who are watching this event as part of the STEM celebration, including hashtag Black in STEM and hashtag Real-Time Chem. And I'm delighted to welcome back to Hot Science, Dr. Raychelle Burks, who's a professor of chemistry at American University. She's the 2020 recipient of the American Chemical Society's Grady Stack Award for interpreting chemistry for the public. This award was established in 1955, and it's a big deal. Some previous Grady Stack Award winners include science fiction author Isaac Asimov and actor Alan Alda. But compared with all previous recipients, Dr. Burks has the coolest Twitter handle, at Rubidium. Rubidium is one of my favorite elements, right next to strontium. Welcome, Raychelle.
Hello.
Great to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
I want
you.
to encourage everybody to ask questions at any time, and we'll have a Q&A session right after the presentation. You can use the box below the live stream window to submit your name and question. You can also click on any of the windows to enlarge the video, or Dr. Burks or me. I would not recommend enlarging me.
Or me.
So, welcome, Raychelle. And let me just start off by asking, so science and the Avengers, what's the connection?
I think, I get asked sometimes, like, what's a good movie that kind of really demonstrates science? Or what's a collection of movies or some kind of media? And my first answer really is always the Avengers, because it does a great job. Right? There's so much science and technology and engineering and math, but it's not just that, it's about the people, right? There's just some real personalities. And you and I both have been scientists for a long time. I bet you've watched the Avengers, Bruce, and said, I know that person, and I know that person, and I've worked with that person. And so I think, the Avengers really does a good job of showcasing, the bodies of knowledge, how we can create and dream, but also the process and the profession. And I think there's definitely 5 points that I want to highlight that is Avengers in STEM. The first one, and I think the most important one, is that you've got to observe. You've got to have keen observation skills, right? We want to be able to observe phenomenon in our world. And if you're the Avengers, all sorts of worlds and universes, but also people, keen observers of people and places, right? Because the more you know, the better questions you can ask and the better answers you can develop and the cooler stuff you can make. And that brings us to number 2, which is to create, right? We want to create new ideas and new methods, and of course, new gadgets. I love a good gadget, right? So, but another important thing is you want to create great relationships. And that brings us to number 3, which is teamwork. You've got to have good teamwork. Science is often collaborative, and every member brings something a little bit special to the mix, right? That special sauce that gives a certain team that edge. And we've seen that in the Avengers. We've seen when teamwork goes well, and we've also seen when teams don't work so well, right? And when they don't work well, and when they do, I think it's, partly due to this next one, which is the re-factor. And this one is so important, I'm actually not going to tell you what it is right now.
Okay, all right.
Little secrets, little twist, little plot twist. And so that brings us to our final one, which is fun. Because, I'm a total nerd. I have fun nerding out with my nerd friends. And so did the Avengers, right? It's fun to fly around. And it's fun to do all the things that they get to do. And even though there are hard times and hard days, the fun you have sometimes with your great coworkers and friends really keep you going. And, that's what I think about with the Avengers. And there are a lot of great parts of all the Avengers movies and their standalones and the whole universe. But I definitely think that there's one clip that really tests our observation skills. And since that's number 1, I want
Okay.
us to watch that clip together.
Right on.
That's enough. Now, I don't know what you plan on doing here.
I've come here to put an end to Loki's schemes.
Then prove it. Put that hammer down.
Yeah, no.
Bad call. He loves his hands.
You want me to put the hammer down?
So when I saw this clip, I had two thoughts. One, maybe that's triboluminescence, because I am a nerd scientist that watch these movies. And number two, I absolutely know scientists that act like that in the lab. I'm sure am I one? I've had my moments.
I hear you. So that's lovely. That's
Beautiful.
really cool. That's cool special effects in the movies. Right?
Yes.
A
Yes.
computer did this. But is this a real thing? Can we actually experience this, or was this just fictional for the movie?
Well, I mean, I think, of course, that's, mythical hammer.
Well, the triboluminescence, is that real, or is that something?
It's definitely real. And the reason why I brought it up is because there's actually several examples floating around, and you don't even have to have like special chemicals or anything. But what is triboluminescence? That's one question, right? So triboluminescence is actually the emission of light is induced or can happen when you actually have mechanical kind of disturbance, right? So some crystalline solid, only certain select ones, gets kind of deformed. And in that deformation, because it gets deformed and then it wants to go back to how it likes to be. It doesn't want to be different. It wants to be how it wants to be. And in the difference, energy is released. And that energy might be absorbed by something nearby. And then it gets excited and it doesn't want to be excited. So it relaxes, much like myself at 10 o'clock at night. It relaxes and it releases energy. Now, the energy that it releases, if we're real lucky, and it's not actually lucky, it's statistics, and physical and chemical properties, that light that's released might be in the visible range and we can see it. And the easiest example of this, and maybe you've done this, I know I have, is if you've ever purchased Wintergreen lifesavers and you're in the dark, now you got to be in the dark, and you crunch down. So that's the mechanics of you actually disturbing a crystalline structure of sugar, which this particular sugar is sucrose. And it's a particular type of crystal that when it gets disturbed and deformed, right, this whole process of triboluminescence happens. Well, you're doing this in air, and that has nitrogen in it. And the nitrogen actually is the thing that they think absorbs the energy. Then it releases some light, and that light is absorbed by methyl salicylate, which is only in these types of lifesavers. That absorbs, gets excited, relaxes, and that's the light that we see. So it's a really complicated relay, but it's so simple. Go buy lifesavers, right? Safely, of course, wear your mask, social distance. Go buy those at H-E-B, and you can do this at home. And just, if people are like, hey, you're eating too many lifesavers, be like, look, it's for science. And and so the cool thing is that, you can do this and we can see it. Now, if you look here, this great video, this great GIF, did you see that flash of blue right?
Yeah.
Right, doesn't it? And look,
Yeah.
that looks, now, here's the great thing. We're seeing this, right? This is a real practical example, right? Of, again, that mechanical disturbance, and look how fast, right, it's happening. And think about the video, right? So this is the cool thing about science, is that I'm not saying that this is the exact thing, but is it possible? And not only that, it brings up a lot of other questions, right? So does that mean that, what does that tell us about what the shield is made of? What does it tell us about the energy, the mechanical energy of Thor, the hammer right here? It doesn't just tell us about the event. It tells us about the materials involved, What does it mean? I mean, there's so many deeper questions here. Just that short clip, right? You can talk about all this great science. And then, of course, I have to mention the classic, experimental lack of safety considerations of, I don't know what's going to happen, but let's do it anyway, right? And Tony's like the supervisor trying to be like, we don't have an OSHA plan for that. So I think there's just so much, right? Again, we want to observe phenomenon and we want to observe people. And I just think that this clip, right, is such a great one.
It really is. So you're saying we go out to HEB, we get our order, and included in our order, wintergreen, it has to be wintergreen because the chemistry, it's not a universal chemical property. It's only certain substances.
Yes.
We get the wintergreen, which is the right chemistry. We go home, we give each other lifesavers, we turn all the lights off, and we bite down with our mouths open, and we'll see flashes of light in our mouth.
Yes. And you want the best place to do this, if you can, right, is to do it in a bathroom, right, when you can sit in front of the mirror, or if you just have a hand mirror, or if you just, you could just do it and sit around and everyone can see each other's. It's like, and then you're eating candy and you're doing science, which is two of my favorites.
Oh my gosh. What could be more fun? All right. Well, what are some other ways that the Avengers portray a scientific approach?
Here is what brings me to my secret refactor, the super secret refactor. And I tell my students that we put the re in the following. So you've got to put the re in all of these four things. Research, then you're going to want to redo, and then you're going to want to revise, and then you're going to want to reinvent, right? And so if you're thinking like, that's a lot of repeating, you are right. And because it's repeating, I can absolutely guarantee you that science involves a lot of failure, right? And there's this whole kind of idea of fail early, right? Fail early, fail often, because it's all of those little failures that give you a chance to actually develop, right? And it's the research and development that brings us the cool stuff. And I don't think anyone, in the universe really kind of encaptures failure. I feel a little bit bad saying that. Captures failure like Tony Stark. Ooh, I shouldn't laugh at, it's not, you don't laugh at your coworkers, but sometimes you do though. But I think that's the thing is that, this was a brilliant person. I don't think anybody in the universe or any fan would think that he wasn't, right? But he had a lot of success, right? But he had a lot of failure. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that, he built on the failures. He built on the successes, right? That's the re part, is that you've got to redo, revise. And with every failure, there is success because you now know more. You know what not to do. And I will tell you as a working scientist that it is just as important to know what not to do as it is to know what you should do.
Indeed. So, Raychelle, there's the perception in movies that a lot of times scientists are just typically working by themselves in their lab. Like, I think back to one of the first science fiction movies I ever watched was Dr. Frankenstein. There was Dr. Frankenstein in his lab. He had as a lab assistant, but he was kind of a loner. Is that the reality of how the Avengers or real scientists actually work?
No, I mean, you see them being able to definitely work independently, right? We've seen that. But they also really rely on a team, right? Because in real life and in the Avengers, as we've seen, no one person can solve every problem, especially the more complicated the problem, right? That might be involve multiple systems, or in the case of Marvel, multiple universes, right? You need an entire team of multiple different skill sets and people. And I think a great example of really teamwork that works great is in Wakanda and Black Panther. So you have T'Challa, right? You have Black Panther, who's the king of Wakanda, who somehow in his spare time also has a PhD in physics. But, he dabbles, he just dabbles. But then you have who's really kind of the chief scientific officer, Princess Suri, right, is tremendous skill set. And they work so great together. And of course, they're siblings, right? But I don't always work great with my sibling. Love you, Renee. But but the thing is here is that there's so much camaraderie and respect. I mean, he has a level of expertise and skill set, but that doesn't overpower. Like he has his thing, and he lets this person do their thing, and there's a lot of mutual respect and collaborative work there. And when everyone has trust in their teammates, and there's a culture and a kind of an environment of respect, you get so much more done, right? You're so much more creative. And because there's just, if you toss out a wild idea, like, what if I invent a time traveling device to go fix this over here? Everybody on your team is like, okay. That's not the wildest idea we've ever heard, right? And so I think that's why the relationships and the teamwork, because then you can really get some things done, right? And really kind of harness the creative forces to work on big projects. And when I think about some of these just monumental, like Human Genome Project, right? Some of the things that are going on in astronomy, the Mars rover, this involved hundreds, if not thousands of people over multiple years working on these things, right? And when you think about all the work to make all that work, anyone who's ever organized a potluck knows how hard it is to get teamwork to work well. And so then you add to that, like, just layers, right, of expertise and complexity. And it really gives you a respect for teamwork when we've seen it go so well, right? And then, of course, in Avengers, we also see when the teamwork and the trust breaks down, the kind of detrimental consequences that can have, which is why I put it so high up in the priority, wanted to highlight it, because it's really key.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. So, here we are, unfortunately, under the grip of a pandemic, and we as scientists are scattered, and we're in our homes. Some of us are slowly creeping back into our laboratories, but for the most part, for the last 2.5 months, we've just been at home. How do you get research done if you're sequestered at home and you're not with your team?
This is kind of where we see an intersection of relationships and technology, right? So first and foremost, you invest in building a great team, and you've got that collaborative relationship where, you're putting people over projects, you're putting people over patents, you're putting people over property. And when you put the people and the relationships, the respect of skill sets and their agency at the forefront, and people feel safe and they feel cared for, if you have a better work environment, you just work harder, right? And you are invested, and you know that your work is valued. So that's first, is to focus on, is everyone safe? Do they have what they need? But also, when you've cultivated that great team, then, how do we do work, and what should we work on next? That's a team thing. So it's about bringing the team together and going, okay, here's our limitations. And I always, my lab, we always joke that we're the MacGyver lab. We have here's a box. You got duct tape, bottle of water, a lighter, make it work, right? And so here's our new reality, right? And when you have a great team, you can have these honest and frank conversations. Here's our new reality. Here's what we're dealing with. Let's reprioritize. Let's, what can we do? Let's not focus on what we can't do. Let's consider it. Okay, we've considered it, but let's now focus on what we can do. And as a team, we came up with new projects. And one of the exciting projects is that we're actually teaching each other new skill sets. We're having Zoom work sessions, and we check in. We actually have an open Zoom window, and we're working and checking in with each other. Then we have kind of like Teach It Thursdays, where we're teaching each other new things. And we're looking at old data, and we're finding all new stuff, right? Because we're looking at it with a different perspective. Different people are looking at things. And in a way, in a weird way, and I'm not advocating for this, but sometimes when the conditions change, it forces you to really examine where you're at and where you've been, and to be creative in ways. And again, to hit back to the rethink, you've got to do a rethink and a reprioritization. And in some ways, we're going in new research directions because we've kind of This is our pivot. Our priorities have completely changed, which is kind of, exciting, a bit scary. So, again, but the team, we decided to do this together. And then there's teams of teams. So I work, in a department, and I don't know about you, Bruce, but like when you then have to share space and resources and time. And so teams then, it's kind of like that last scene in the last Avengers movie where like all the different teams show up, but they've all been so well coordinated. It's like, wow, right? And so that, in my own mind, I like to pretend that our departments that share all these resources, it's like Wakanda's rolling up, right? And then we're coming in over here. And so it's not that glamorous or that fun.
All right.
Think about it.
Great. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Would you like to see what questions are being asked in the chat room? Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the first question comes from Neo, and it's a very chemistry-based question. He asks, does magnesium do something similar regarding, in the context of triboluminescence?
Was it Neo or Neo?
Neo. I think the main is calling
Ooh.
it.
Okay.
And Neo saying, bring the answer.
Yeah. I love it. So there are all kinds of compounds that triboluminesce, and there are some magnesium containing complexes. Most of the time though, there's a lot of copper containing ones. And usually it's, there might be like a metal, and then there's a bunch of ligands, these big molecules that cluster. Because remember, the one feature that a lot of these theories of triboluminescence have is that it has to be a certain type of crystalline structure. And so that means that they have to have like a certain, when you disturb them, they behave in a certain way. And so there's some really cool stuff out there. I can also put a link. There's some really kind of easy to approach papers. One I'm thinking of right off the bat is in the Journal of Chemical Education, which gives tons of good examples. I can share that with y'all and to be able to access that. And then in the full video talk, we actually give a couple great examples and actually show some more images and video. So I hope you'll take a look at that, Neil.
Okay, cool. At the end of our event tonight, we're going to post the link where you could find Dr. Burks' full presentation she gave a couple of years ago that has even more cool stuff. If you thought these 17 minutes were cool, power to engage in. So our next question comes from Liz, and she asks, are there ideas in the Avengers movies that not yet reality, but that offer inspiration to scientists for something that could become reality?
Yes. And I think there's lots of what I love too about this fandom, and I'm a huge Star Trek and Star Wars nerd, is that, I grew up on those fandoms and in the Marvel fandom, is that you get inspired by these total, worlds that were built out of actually a collection of people's imagination. And so there's another great resource is Dr. Sabrina Collins has written a lot on kind of Wakanda and the vibranium science and what does it mean for materials? What would that material be like? Because when you think about vibranium is a material used throughout Wakanda, right? It's used in energy, it's used in transport, right? So and so it must have certain properties that allow it to have all of these different, in different compounds and different alloys. And she's written a lot about it, and a lot of it's just freely available, written in general, plain language, really approachable. But also the kind of imaging devices. So one thing that caught my eye was in Suri's lab, right? So you need to observe, right? We talked about observation, but she's also got, first of all, great medical expertise in addition to being a great chemist, physicist, and engineer. But when she, right, in her spare time, when she was fixing folks, they had really great imaging. So in my research, I do a lot of imaging research. So being able to see what's going on beneath the surface, where is the problem, right? So you can fix it. And we've seen that in our lifetime, right? Where the different imaging devices that we use, think about if you've ever had an MRI, right? If you've ever had any kind of, PET scan, CAT scan, like any kind of the images, right? They get better and better, it seems like each year. and you're just seeing this information and data, right? So that was my little corner of it. But if you were to ask, and lots of scientists have shared this, across the Marvel universe, and dare I say DC, and different fandoms, we get inspired by fiction all the time.
Very cool. Appreciate that. Next question comes from Kelly. She says, Dr. Burks, do you know how much consultation from scientists these movies have? Also, since I'm a scientist, how does someone become a consultant, if that's a thing?
There is a thing, and I've been lucky enough to consult, not on Marvel yet. But there's something called the Science and Entertainment Exchange, which is a kind of a program with the national academies, because we know that the arts and media, right, they have such power and influence, right? Not only do they reflect our lives, they can influence our lives, right? And so there's been some great work there in the Gina Davis Institute talking about representation and how that kind of, shifts the narrative and can really kind of move the needle. And so you can absolutely do that. So Science and Entertainment Exchange is a way to, and if you literally just Google it, I'm not trying to pawn you off, but if you Google it, there's a whole way that scientists can get involved. And what happens is that art folks and authors, showrunners, just a whole gamut, right, will then approach the exchange and say, hey, so we need help with this pilot or this book or this whatever. And I've been lucky enough to consult on, I consulted on Madam Secretary, which was a hoot, as my grandmother would say. And so, yeah, you can definitely get involved. And it's, sometimes you might get lots of calls, but it really is like, it might be an episode of television. I got consulted for a movie that was in production. There's a real range, books. And sometimes it's email, sometimes it's phone calls. I do know someone who did Thor. I think it was Thor Dark World. And so, yeah, there's definitely science consultants. I will say this is that as a science consultant, I found that it's not my job to be like a dream killer. Right? Like sometimes you watch and you're like, no, that would never happen. Right. But that's their vision. And so, okay, so what kind of like we did with Triboluminescence and Thor's hammer and the shield is, okay, but what could work, right? Like, let's follow this through. So it lets me be creative, and I think you'd have a great time with it.
That sounds really exciting. Were you then called in to consult broadly on all things science, or was it just chemistry?
No, so I'm a forensic chemist, and definitely the episode of Madam Secretary, I do forensic work. And so I work on detection schemes for explosives, chemical weapons, and various controlled substances like drugs and things like that. And so this particular episode was about a mass killing. So and quite frankly, they wanted my expertise, because how would you do it? But show it in a way, we talked about the safety and the implications, but also because of my forensics background, is how would the scientists have figured out what it was so that other people were safe and that they could move this plot along. So we talked about not only the chemistry and the biology, but we also talked about what would be the forensic and how fast could they get results. But it was pretty targeted, which was great.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun. Our next question comes from Mateo, who asks, have you ever had a big disagreement with your teammates?
Yes. Look, I think Mateo didn't even hesitate.
That's great.
I think I will say this, as someone who is a supervisor and is supervised, is that, and I'm a chemist, the hardest part of my job and the thing that keeps me up at night is being a good supervisor and a good teammate. Because, people, we have our moments. We have our moments of not good and our moments of we're awesome. And I think that, these are under stressful circumstances, and everyone trying to do this, but absolutely had disagreements. It's not about not having disagreements, right? It's not about not failing. It's about what you do when the disagreement is happening, what you do in the face of failure. How fast can you get to a resolution, and how well can you do that? How does everyone feel like they've, you know, collaborated in the process, right? So disagreements are going to happen. It's we can do that respectfully, and we can do it in a way where the conflict sometimes, again, that's where the great ideas can come from, and the progress can be made in teamwork. So, you know, it's just about getting through to the other side.
Right on. The next question comes from Brian. He asks, what fraction of chemicals synthesized actually wind up being of practical use?
Oh, you know what? I don't even want to think about that number. Was it Brian? Was it Brian?
Brian, yes.
Brian. I don't know if we want to dwell on that. No, but I think my organic chemist colleagues would have a better hard answer. But the thing is this, what's amazing to me is that it's sometimes hard to predict. We're trying to get better at that for machine learning, right? And different, you know, we have these huge data sets now, so we can use that to make better predictions. But some of my favorite stories of inventions are the ones that they were like, number 67, or, you know, or the happy accidents, right? The Teflons, the Post-it notes. And so the whimsy of discovery, right, is somewhere in there. But then we also want to be very targeted. So we're kind of trying to reach a happy medium. But sometimes it might be one statistic I'm like,
Well, let's see. Valerie asks a question that goes back to one of the videos you showed. And she says, wait, so that guy who got thrown backwards, was that real?
Well, so they all got thrown. That's the thing that cracks me up, right? That's a classic lab accident, which is why I tell my students on safety, we always have this big on safety training, is that I say, it's not going to be you. You're great. You're wearing your goggles. You've got your personal protection equipment on. Fantastic. It's going to be this person over here that mixes that with that over there, and kaboom, right? And this is why, like you see in that clip, you have this thing, right? And so that's a great question too, because it gets back to, okay, but you have this kind of concussive, explosive force almost. Where's that coming from? Is that some secondary effect? Because it's not related to triboluminescence. Like, what is that like? And then there was that weird sound. Remember, did you hear that sound in there too? And so, you know, I think it's not just one effect. That's just the one I highlighted. But when, again, you start making all those observations, no one phenomenon is probably going to be able to explain all of those. There's a lot going on, right? We've got a shield with vibranium in it. You've got a mythical hammer, and you've got super soldier and a Norse god.
So as it turns out, it looks Tony Stark is actually in the chat room too. So I guess he's here to testify that it did really happen. But he says, I never fail. I only succeed poorly.
Ah, yes. I like that motto.
Here's an interesting question from Anne. She says, do you have any advice on how to do cool interactive science experiments, such as the classic strawberry DNA, for middle school and elementary students through a Zoom call?
You know, I do. My first recommendation is there are some great curated resources, but there's also one book that I'd want to recommend, and I actually have it on my desk because I just really love it. And Liz Henneke writes these great books. And Chemistry for Kids is her latest one. And of course, I like it because I'm in it. No,
Is that you? Oh, cool.
that is me. And you can, in here, I talk about how to make a spectrophotometer with a smartphone. You can do that at home. But what I love about her books too is that this is all kitchen stuff. She's actually called the kitchen pantry scientist. So, you know, you don't have to worry, you know, well, of course, they're just, yes, don't let your kids reign free in the kitchen. I know my mom would never have let me do that, but these ones are great. But also that's the time too, is even like I'm doing when we're doing these training sessions, is sometimes I'll put them right on the phone or my laptop and walk into the kitchen, kind of have it set up. Or if I'm actually demonstrating something, is have it out. But the great thing about having a source like this or curating all of these, and Liz has a great website, but there's tons of great educational resources that are out there. There's lots of great YouTube channels, and they'll also have kind of clickable resources. And a lot of the big professional societies, especially right now when there's lots of folks trying to do science at home, they've made all this content freely available. And they give you not only kind of like you'll need vinegar, baking soda, or there's a great pH indicator one that you can do with cabbage. The Royal Society put that out in a series of tweets and then kind of got it all together at home. And so if you really do kind of like an online cooking class, right, where you're like, okay, you know, let me see what you're doing, and actually, okay, like you're actually mixing that a little bit too hard, right? And so, you know, it takes a little bit of practice. Again, this is the kind of reapproach. You know, we're all kind of in this landscape, and so, but there's definitely a way that I definitely have traded skills and try to learn new things with my group and with colleagues, and having these great resources. But this is definitely one. It covers the gamut, and it's all easy and affordable. I wouldn't recommend it unless it was super affordable, and you probably have at least half the stuff already.
Excellent. Thank you. Raychelle, we have time for one more question. The chat room is just blowing up. As I'm going to have to find one. We have time for a quick question, quick answer. I see 3 in a row from Johnny, Carrie, and Christina that are all talking about the same thing. Let me read them off really quick, and maybe you could give us one answer that covers them all.
Oh.
Johnny says, which superhero is closest to being scientifically accurate? Kara says, what's your favorite example of real science in a movie? And Christina asks, what sci-fi movie or TV series is the most accurate or shows the greatest diversity of science that you've seen or heard of? They're kind of all in the same thing.
Oof.
What movie or TV show shows real science or science in its most accurate way? I love that question because when I watch science, I'm always looking for, could it really happen? Is this accurate from what I know from a geologic perspective? And you must do it from a chemistry perspective. Is there anything you say, man, they got it right?
Ooh. Well, you know what I want to say, and you know, we just talked about the Avengers, but I think I'm going to go Star Trek Next Generation, which I grew up with, watched it with my parents. And you know, what I always loved about Star Trek, right, is you always saw it, like the people in my neighborhood, right? People that look like us, talk about real personality types, right? Sometimes great teamwork, right? There was the class clown person, there was the person who was super serious, right? But also everyone had these dramatic skill sets. And while it wasn't specific to chemistry, right, there was such a range of STEM across that entire show run, and ages, right? And ability levels, and everybody's contributions were valued, right? And they also, again, showed that sometimes things went phenomenally well, right? Wild ideas were thrown out there. They're like, yes, we should stick this pin in the warp core, and it's totally going to work. That was not an actual episode, but you know.
Excellent, Raychelle.
I would say that.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our time is up. As we're winding down here, let's just put up the last slide, which is going to show you guys, if you want more, go to hotsciencecooltalks.org, pull up talk number 112. That's Raychelle's hour-long talk with another 20 minutes of Q&A at the end of it. If you want to subscribe to this series, also hotsciencecooltalks.org, you could find out there where to subscribe, and you'll get an email when it's time to register for our next event coming up. Dr. Burks, thank you so much. This is such.
Thank you.
I really, really appreciate you participating. And I don't know, next time, try to drum up a little more enthusiasm. Can you work on that? It was so great having you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody who turned in. Live long and prosper. May the force be with you.
Right on. Have a great night, everybody.